Welcome to the Business Success Strategies with Adrienne McLean. This is a 30-minute interview with successful business people who have been able to achieve amazing results with growing a business. Business Success Strategies is proudly sponsored by The Speaker's Practice and AdrienneMcLean.com, helping business owners with marketing and promotions with a specialty with public speaking. Enjoy today's Business Success Strategies interview.
Welcome to the Speaker's Practice Business Success Strategies interview. Hi, I'm Adrienne McLean. The Speaker's Practice helps professionals with business building and promotional tools to get more clients. We're thrilled to have Mahesh Enjeti from Auracle World join us today. Mahesh Enjeti is the consummate strategist, a visionary brand builder, and a marketing maven. Mahesh is an experienced board member with corporate and consulting experience across many sectors and diverse geographies, spanning really 5 decades. Mahesh is known for his fresh perspectives on strategy, leadership, marketing, brands, and entrepreneurship. I've always appreciated Mahesh as being a fantastic sounding board. He thinks through what you're saying and then shares some valuable wisdom. Our topic today is secrets of good strategy. Welcome, Mahesh.
Thank you, Adrienne. Oh, that was a glorious introduction. I hope all of it is fact, not fiction.
Oh, no, it's all fact.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So what are we talking about? What secrets of good strategy? Okay. Let me start sharing my screen and feel free to pop any questions if you like. Just interrupt me if you need to. Let me first bring up my screen so that we can get started. I call it turning tragedy into happily ever after, because oftentimes, people find that the strategy has not worked, so it ends up being a tragedy. And how do we actually make it something which is provides happiness to the business going forward? So let me quickly take you through what I'm going to talk about. We're going to discuss what is strategy. And then what are the elements of strategy, what goes into it, and talk a little bit about diagnosis and insights. It's a huge subject, so I'll just touch on it. And what are the keys to good strategy, and how do we implement strategy? How do we make sure that the strategy is well implemented? And finally, I'll probably look ahead a little bit and see what might happen to strategy in the years to come. So, what is strategy? Now, that's a really tricky question.
Everybody wants to know.
Because I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood terms in business. When I did my MBA way back in, I think I went to business school in 1973, and strategy was a discipline that had come from the military. And there were not many people who were talking about strategy in business. But today you look around and everybody throws around the word strategy. And I think to a certain extent, this familiarity has sort of led to a kind of false knowledge, an impression of false knowledge in it. Because I've had positions myself called General Manager Strategic Marketing and Executive Strategic Marketing Manager. I wonder why that word strategy, if that word were not there, would my job become any less strategic? I wonder. So, and we talk about even little things. Oh, that's a very strategic approach to solving a problem. Choosing which film to go to, it's become a strategic decision. So I think it's very, very misunderstood, this term. So I just want to sort of unlearn some of those misconceptions about what strategy is.
Well, that'd be fantastic. It is used.
Sorry?
It is a word that's used a lot, but
used a lot,
right?
And probably means a lot different things to different people.
Yes.
So I define strategy as a bridge that connects opportunities and gaps in the marketplace to the resources and capabilities in the business. Now, the important thing to remember here is that bridge could be a very narrow timber bridge, or it could be an 8-lane flyover. It depends on the resources you have in the business. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is still a bridge. And that's the first thing we need to remember. The second thing I think we need to remember is that bridge is not static. It is constantly changing. It is dynamic. I don't know if you have seen the film Harry Potter. Have you,
Yes,
Adrienne?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in Harry Potter, you have the school, the Hogwarts School of Magic or whatever it's called. And you see those staircases in Hogwarts School shifting all the time. Your strategy is a little like that. It doesn't shift continuously like that, but it's certainly something that needs to be adapted, that needs to be sort of evolved as the environment changes, as the context for the business changes. So that's again something that we need to remember.
Mm.
Now, my other favorite quote, it's actually, I think, from Sun Tzu, but I've been taking credit for this because Sun Tzu is no more and he can't sue me for violating his copyright. The essence of strategy is sacrifice. I think this is a very powerful and meaningful and profound statement because I believe strategy involves a lot of trade-offs. And if you think of the game of chess, you don't determine who the winner is based on the number of chess pieces on the board that you're left with.
That's true.
You got to be able to checkmate the opponent's king. So the end game is checkmate. It's not how many pieces you have left. So if you apply that to strategy, it's not only about knowing what to do, it's choosing what not to do. So are you able to give up your pawn in order to be able to checkmate your opponent's king in a few moves? And that's the kind of approach we need to take in business too, because we get tempted all the time, to do different things.
Just with that, Mahesh, it's not that easy to work out what to keep and what to sacrifice.
I remember I was asked this question at the height of COVID. And I, at that time, saw a lot of businesses actually cut back on things that were wasteful, which they were doing because they were doing all along.
Yeah.
And I think we need to take that kind of an approach when we decide on what to do and what not to do. Think of it as a COVID-like situation. What is it that you would not do? While what is it that you must do?
Right.
And I think if you take such a disciplined approach, I'm not saying exactly you should assume there's COVID going around all the time, but I think you need to be more disciplined. And it comes from your ability to prioritize your task. Most people find it very difficult to prioritize. If you ask them what are the most important things in your business, they're more likely to rattle off 10 different things. But if you tell them, just sort of pare it down to just the top 3, they have extreme difficulty in doing that because they are unable to make that choice in terms of what is more important, what is less important. So discipline, I would say, is the fundamental trait for a good strategist. You've got to be really very disciplined in terms of choosing what to do and knowing what not to do, or the other way.
Right. Okay. That's fantastic advice.
I've sort of borrowed this from Richard Rumel's book, which you do have.
Yes.
Yeah, you have it there. Oh, great, fantastic.
There we go.
This is his earlier book. He's got a new book called The Crux, which is also equally interesting. And I've sort of I like Richard. He's called the strategist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's really very highly regarded. So let me just move the screen here or minimize it so that it doesn't interfere with my text. A good strategy is intelligent problem solving, driven by challenge, and involves analysis, direction, and cohesive action. So the key words there are problem solving, challenge, analysis, direction, and cohesive action. We'll talk about these terms in some detail later on. And a bad strategy is about audacious goals, spin, utopia, annual budgeting and planning, touted as strategy. Now, this is something that I see most often. Most of the strategy documents and the strategy work that people do, they talk about ambitions. They talk about their big, hairy, audacious goal.
Yeah.
That's not strategy. That's a nice to have, but how do you actually do something that tackles a key challenge of the business? And that is strategy. So it's sort of important that we do not get carried away by our own audacious goals. I think it's important to be more down to earth and say, okay, what is the challenge we are facing and how do we resolve it? So this is, as I said, from Richard Rummel's work. Now, I'll ask you a question. Which is the lesser evil? A good strategy that is poorly implemented, or a poor strategy well implemented? Of course, you would want a good strategy with good tactics. Obviously, everyone wants that. But if you were given a choice between these two, which one would you prefer?
Well,
Adrienne?
I think a good strategy that's poorly implemented is at least moving you in the right direction.
Correct.
A poor strategy, well implemented, would just send you further into the wrong direction.
Exactly. I mean, imagine it's a ship and it's sort of taken the wrong direction, and it's sort of shipped along very efficiently at a very good pace. And after 3 days, it sort of discovers that it is so far away from its intended destination. Now, the good strategy that's poorly implemented is like a ship that is going in the right direction, but it tends to stall in between, stutters and whatever, but it's still in the direction. It can recover. And once it recovers, it can actually pursue that path until it gets to the destination. So it's important not to undermine the value of having a good strategy. Now, let's break down strategy into some of its elements. Now, what are the 3 key things I see? This is my own perspective of strategy. I call them the 3 C's of strategy because it's common sense, connections, and creativity. Now, I know common sense is probably it's not very common. It's a rare trait to have, but strategy is ultimately about making smart choices. And it's often quite simple, although it may be very profound. It is actually quite as simple. It's a decision of go or no go, do this or not do this. Okay, and if we look at strategy that way, I think it becomes a lot more simplified, a lot more easy to grapple with. The second thing is about connections. Strategy is always about connecting the internal with the external. I talked to you earlier about the bridge.
Yes.
It is also about connecting the top and the bottom, the top of the organization and the bottom, which is actually the coal face, which is doing all the grunt work. It is also about connecting all the functions in the business so that all the functions are working together in terms of achieving that overarching objective, whatever that is. And it also involves creativity, because strategy is ultimately about developing a hypothesis. Because no one knows whether the strategy is right or wrong until it's actually implemented. But you have a fair guess as to what you should be doing under the circumstances. The other important reason why creativity is so critical is because if everyone had access to the same data about the market and everyone analyzed it the same way, they have the best analysts and they all analyze the same way, everyone will choose the same strategy. And that, according to Richard Rummel, will lead to an equal share of the profits in that market. But we don't want that. We want to be able to differentiate our strategies. In fact, one of my favorite quotes, which is my own quote, is that strategy that is not creative does not make any dent in the business. Similarly, creativity that is not strategic is not lasting. So I think it's important to remember that common sense, connections, and creativity are the three legs of a good strategy.
It's
Now,
the creative bit, the creative aspect of it that really differentiates the different brands, isn't it?
that is true. And I think, I know this is not the topic of our conversation today, but there's so much of overlap between brand and strategy. Because your brand, I mean, I see a brand as the foundation of every business, not a part of the marketing function. So if you get your brand right, then you also got your strategy right. And vice versa. If you got your strategy right, I think you pretty much you can work towards getting your brand right. So I think about what is it, what's the core? Who are we? What do we stand for? How do we do things? How do we behave? These are all essentials of good branding. Yeah. And strategy requires that branding foundation for it to be able to grow the business profitably. So I think the two are in some way interrelated, intertwined. Okay. So let's look at the traditional view of strategy. This is what I was taught when I went to business school. And I'm sure every business which has done a strategy in the past has looked at this. Where are we today? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? Those are the three questions which are often asked. And then we talk a little more detail about what's our vision, which is probably a distant target, but a moving target. What's our mission, which is a little more specific and tangible in terms of what we want to achieve in the next 3 years or whatever. And then most strategy documents include a SWAT. I'll talk a little more about SWAT in a couple of slides. And then it sort of gets into strategy. And then we say, okay, strategy is this overall thing. And then now go and develop tactics, which will ensure that the strategy is implemented. Yeah. But oftentimes these tactics are not necessarily supporting the strategy or supporting each other, because a lot of the tactics are defined and determined by the budgets. So the strategy planning session is more about budgets and how do we divvy up that budget across different functional areas, across different projects. So as a result, you somehow, by the time you got to this tactic stage, you've lost your connection back to your vision, mission, SWOT, and strategy. And that happens often in organizations, something we need to be mindful of. Now, this is my contemporary view of strategy. It's been, again, inspired by some of Richard Rummel's work. And this is a lot more narrow in terms of its definition of strategy. It starts with a challenge. And the challenge has to be something that is so critical that it could make or break the organization. So first thing is you need to identify a challenge that is, it's a problem or an issue, a challenge, whatever you want to call it, but something that is material to the organization's survival and growth in the future. The second aspect is diagnosis, which is very crucial. I often quote Einstein's famous lines, where he said, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I will spend 59 minutes of that in analyzing the problem and only 1 minute coming up with a solution. I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but what it means is that we need to spend a lot of time trying to analyze what are the underlying reasons for the challenge or problem. Oftentimes, we make the mistake of confusing symptoms of a problem as the reasons of the problem. Symptoms are not necessary. Like if I have a headache is a symptom, but the headache could be caused because of my vision, because of my bad back or neck, or it could be because of an upset stomach, or it could be something more serious. So I think we need to separate out the symptoms of the problem with the underlying reasons causing the problem. And then we develop a strategy, which is an intended direction in which we want to go from now on. And the last item is a coordinated action. It's important that these are not just tactics, but these are actions that are coordinated. Again, I'll touch on this a little later. They all need to be working in unison with each other while supporting the overarching strategy. Mm-hmm. Now, what is this challenge? And I sort of define it in three ways. It's growth, no doubt, but it has to be profitable growth, it has to be responsible growth, and it has to be sustainable growth. Mm-hmm. If a business does not make profits, it's unlikely to survive. It's got to be able to make profits. Its revenue must exceed its costs, including all those hidden costs and long-term costs and fixed costs. Two, a business needs to be, especially in today's circumstances, need to be responsive to the needs of all its stakeholders, which includes not just shareholders or owners in a small business, but the customers, the employees, the community, the society, the environment. And lastly, it has to be sustainable. I use the word sustainable here not only to mean environmental sustainability, ESG metrics, but also the ability to continually achieve that growth. But I have my own formula which says growth is a double-edged sword. I use capital G for growth and small g for gravitational force, So the more you grow, the greater the gravitational force that pulls the business down. So G and G work in opposite directions. So it's not good enough just to have growth, but it has to be growth that can be sustained over a period of time. And we'll sort of look at it a little more closely in the next slide. This is a very interesting insight from a survey which is done. It sort of informs an article in this book by Per Davidson and others. SMEs, and we are talking about small businesses here, that pursue profits at the expense of growth are more likely to achieve high profitability and high growth over time. I'll let that sink in. SMEs that pursue profits at the expense of growth are more likely to achieve high profitability and high growth, whereas businesses that seek growth in sales while sacrificing profitability end up with low growth and low profitability as the years go by. Now, if you think a little more deeply about this, it becomes obvious that if you're making profits, then you're able to reinvest those profits in the business to allow the business to grow by delivering higher value to your customers, higher wages to your employees, and higher returns for the owners of the business. So profitability is key to growth. And I think this is a point that is often sort of overlooked and missed out by a lot of businesses. They are so obsessed and fixated with growth rates in terms of their overall volume of growth and revenue growth that they perhaps sometimes tend to overlook what's happening to their profitability. Here's an example. I call it the paradox of growth. Let's take a product. Is this just a hypothetical product? And for simplicity's sake, I've sort of rounded off all the figures. Let's take a product that costs $100 to buy for the customer. And let's assume that the cost of making that product is $70. So the profit that the business is making per unit is $30. And let's also assume, for simplicity's sake, that 100 units are sold. So the total revenue for the business is 100 times 100, which is $10,000. And the total profit is 30 times 100, which is $3,000. Now let us assume that the business has dropped its price by $10. So there's a 10% decrease in the price. As a result, its profit per unit goes down to $20, $90 minus $70, right? You're with me so far?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Now, what's happened here is suddenly the profit, which was $30, has come down to $20, which is a 1/3 decrease in profits.
Yeah.
So you got a sort of 10% decrease in price and a 1/3 decrease in profits. Let's assume that as a result of the drop in price, you have sold 115 units. That is, you have a 15% increase in your quantity sold. And at that price of $90, that equals what? I think $10,350. So you have a revenue growth of 3.5%. If you look at only revenue, you'll be quite happy. Oh, I've got a 3.5% increase in my revenue. But if you look at the total profit, the profit you made before was $3,000, and the profit you make now is $2,300. And therefore, that's a 23.3% decrease in the overall profits. Now, if you take a closer look at profits while you're sort of marking out your revenue figures, I think you have a better appreciation of what is this doing to the business. I'll give you a slightly different example. Now, someone said, oh yeah, if you drop the price and you're able to increase the quantity sold, you might also have economies of scale, and therefore your cost per unit might go down. I said, okay, fine, let's assume that there is a small decrease in the cost per unit. Yeah. So from $70, the cost has come down to $67. So that's a 4.3% decrease in the cost. You're now selling the product still at $90 as before, and the profit per unit has come down, has increased to $23 from $20. But compared to the original profit, it's still down by about 23.3%.
Yes.
Quantity sold, now I have said it is 120, not 115 as before. So there's a 20% increase in the volume. So you're very happy. You sort of reduce your cost per unit by 4.3%. You sort of increase the quantity sold by 20%. Your total revenue has now gone up by 8% to $10,800. But your total profit is still less than what you were making before, when you were charging $100 per unit. Yeah. So there's an 8% increase in revenue, but an 8% drop in total profits. So that's the bottom line, I think, which businesses need to be constantly. Yeah, sorry, you were asking a question?
Well, it's an amazing example, Mahesh, because by making a business decision to discount a product, they're actually making it harder for themselves because they've got to go and sell more of the product.
Exactly. And the bottom line is, Adrienne, you can only bank your profit, not your revenue, because the revenue comes and you got to obviously meet your costs out of that revenue. So what is left is the profit. And you can only bank your profit. You can't bank your revenue. You can't be happy increasing your revenue because you cannot bank it. You can only bank the net profit that you make. So this is something which, when you are devising your strategy, I think it's important to say, is this strategy delivering us increased profits responsibly and sustainably over a period of time? Now let's look at diagnosis. Sorry, unless you have some questions.
No, it's a great example of how it worked.
Yeah, I know this is a very simplistic way of, but I just wanted to convey the underlying thinking behind it by using a simple example. Yeah,
fantastic.
I thought we should spend a little bit of time looking at the diagnosis part of it. We won't be able to cover all of it because that is a whole different, almost like a webinar or even a workshop in itself, you know?
Yes.
You can undertake a number of different analysis based on different frameworks. You can do trend analysis, what is happening to trends, not only qualitatively, but also quantitatively. You can do an environmental scan, which is probably one of the inputs that goes into SWOT. And you can do a pestle analysis, which is an analysis of the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors surrounding the business. It's important to understand when you're developing strategy to look at it like a funnel. Start very broadly at the environment, at the industry, and then your business. You don't start from your business and go up, but you actually start from the environment, the industry, and then the business when you're doing this analysis. You could use Porter's 5 forces for the industry, not for the business. You could do SWOT analysis, and some companies do balanced scorecard and do a strategy map based on the balanced scorecard. There's different techniques. What is not so important is the technique. What is important is the insights based on the analysis that you undertake. And I will talk a little bit about SWOT, because that's something which I've seen in, I don't know, close to 1,000 strategy documents, perhaps, in my lifetime. And SWOT is not a waste of time, but it can become such a waste of time if it is not done properly. So I thought I will highlight some of the sort of landmines that exist while doing SWOT, so that people can actually make their SWOT much more useful, much more meaningful, and much more effective. Firstly, whenever I see a SWOT, I see a whole long laundry list of strengths. Not all of them are critical to the business. And they're nice to have, but do they make a real difference to the business?
Yeah.
Include in your strengths only those that are actually something that you have that maybe others don't have, in the same measure or the same quality or at the same cost, whatever. Secondly, I see a very long list of strengths and very few weaknesses. And this often happens, and it's very interesting to see that. But these weaknesses that do not, again, they are not something that could destroy the business, undermine the business. And on the flip side, businesses also tend to miss some weak signals that are emerging in the market that can be potentially disruptive. We tend to ignore small players because, they are too small. They will not be able to sort of threaten us in any way. They are not a challenge to our business. They will probably disappear in time, because we always tend to become very complacent when it comes to our own business. We think nothing can touch it, but you've got to be sort of monitoring those weak signals which are coming out from the periphery. It's like, clear vision in, when things are hidden, that's very, very tricky always.
Yes.
The opportunities that are listed are not real or tangible. They're, again, nice to have, good on paper, but what can you do with it on the field? And they are unable to be accessed. So sometimes they are not real or tangible. Sometimes they may be real or tangible, but you cannot access it. You need to create additional resources within the organization in order to be able to leverage those opportunities. And lastly, the threats are vague. Now, this is one thing which I would like to emphasize, is that if you have a threat, you need to know what's the likelihood of that threat occurring and what's the impact of that threat. And depending on how likely a threat is and how impactful it is, you determine whether you need to sort of counter that threat or not. There's no point in going after every threat, because you won't have the resources to be able to address all of that. But pick and choose those threats that are material to the business, which have a high likelihood of happening, and a medium maybe impact, or even maybe low likelihood of occurring, but could have a huge impact on the business. So you do that analysis and then pick the threats that you really want to sort of address. So these are some of the, there are lots more, but I thought I'll pick 4 key sort of pointers that could help businesses to refine how they approach SWOT.
Yeah, it's very hard with SWOT to be independent or not sort of an emotionally involved with your company. So So it's not necessarily as clear a functioning SWOT analysis as if it was done by an independent source.
That is true. I mean, I suppose sometimes consultants help organizations to take a more objective view of their business. But I think if you are continually talking to customers, in fact, one of the things that a lot of value you can get out of just talking to your customers, and some of your customers would be using your competitors' products too. There's another technique, I didn't mention that in the diagnosis. It's called the 3 circles. By a guy called Joe Urbani. You can check it out. It's a very, very simple but very powerful way of trying to determine where the opportunities lie for your business. Now, if you talk to your customers, if you talk to your distribution channel, if you're selling through distributors, and sometimes if you talk to your competitors, if you follow the media, the financial media, in terms of what others are doing, if you follow what is happening in the industry, I think you have a pretty decent idea in terms of what the opportunities and threats are. You just have to keep your eyes and ears open, Adrienne, that's all. And I think we oftentimes don't invest it, even going to a conference where maybe there are other people from your industry attending, or even if it's not about your industry, going to a conference where you perhaps get to see the broader environment with a different lens, because someone at the conference spoke about an emerging trend or an emerging technology or an emerging new product, which could actually trigger off ideas in your head. So I think it's very important to always look out rather than just only look within the organization. And sometimes we tend to sort of fall victim to that. We are so obsessed with our own business that we don't take the time to be able to sort of look outside our own company, our own business. I know that's a very valid point, but I think you have to take the time to be able to sort of look out. It's an outside in view of the business, of your own business. So distilling all of that, strategy is actually about developing a broad direction for the company. What you need to do is overlay the rational insights that you have drawn from that analysis we talked about earlier on, including SWOT. You overlay that with your intuitive understanding of the industry, market, competition, and consumer. Never underestimate your own experience, your own gut feel, your own sort of intuitive view of, because I think you need to marry the two. It's not just about rational insight, but it's also about your own intuitive, because you cannot undermine the years spent in the industry. You should not be led by that, but you should definitely sort of take that on board. Secondly, think of what is it that you can do based on resources that are already available in the organization that you can leverage to create new opportunities. And what are the opportunities that may come from the marketplace and you don't have the resources for it currently? And how do you sort of exploit those? So exploring opportunities with your current resources and exploiting opportunities from new gaps in the marketplace, you need to look at both before you finalize your strategy. Did you want to ask a question?
Well, I think it's nice what you're saying is to look within and utilize the resources you have. And often with small businesses, that's what they inherently do, because they're cash poor a lot of the time, or they're not wanting to spend when it's not necessary. So I think this gives a good approach to working it out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you might say, okay, no, we don't have the resources to be able to do that. But at least you made that decision, you made the choice, knowing after considering the other alternatives. Now, if you don't consider the alternatives, then you might be missing out on something very, very critical. But if you consider the options and then you decide not to do something, and that's fine, because resources and time, resources including time, are the more other limiting factors for any business, more so for small businesses. But it is true of any business. The other thing is integrate top-down and bottom-up thinking. I know you might say in a small business there are not too many layers. I agree, but sometimes we as owner managers of businesses, we tend to ignore what we get out of the field from people who are actually selling the product or talking to customers or in the marketplace talking to competition or distributors or retailers or whatever. I think it's important before you finalize your strategy, see what else is coming from the bottom up. And is there a meeting point between the top down and the bottom up thinking? If it's not, there is a gap somewhere. And I think you need to sort of look carefully at that and look out for potential threats from disruptive technologies, new entrants and regulation. Now, in the midst of all those, the challenges you have, day-to-day challenges you have, it's difficult to keep abreast of what's happening in the outside world. But disruptive technologies is something I think we all need to be aware of and alert to.
Yeah, I've got an example of that. A company built up a following on Facebook of about 35,000 members, and they were doing really, really well. And then somehow or other, Facebook disabled their account. There's lots of spam, and there's a lot of hackers on Facebook now. So somehow or other, Facebook were alerted and closed the account down, and so the business owner went to Meta to try and sort it out, but they wouldn't even consider it. So you've got to be cognizant of getting your customers off social media and emails and what have you. And it's a threat, scams and hackers on social media are there.
And you need to have that direct link to your customer, not just through one platform like Facebook. You got to build your database of customers internally in your business, because that's the biggest asset you have. And your ability to either upsell or cross-sell or sell more or test out new products, whatever it is, I think your customer base is your biggest, apart from your people, I think your customer base is your biggest asset. And sometimes regulation can also change what's happening. I mean, like, depending on what's happening to certain products. Like, for instance, we see so many nail parlors coming in shopping centers. And what if tomorrow there are some serious restrictions? Because apparently nail parlors are the quickest way for infections to spread. And that could change that business model completely. They may have to invest a lot of resources, time, people, technology to be able to minimize the kind of health issues that might be coming up as a result. So some of these industries are not regulated, not highly regulated at all. And suddenly there could be regulation. If you have a few cases, then I think people will start taking notice and regulators will be up, on your back.
Yes.
Lastly, this is a technique that I picked up from Olay, when Olay was actually, oil of Olay was repositioned as Olay. Roger Martin and A.G. Laff. I think that Roger Martin also has a book by the same name, or both of them have a book, How to Win, I think. So it's ultimately strategy in the market sense is about where do you want to play, how do you want to play. You've got to choose your market. You don't want to play where there are big players who might spend tons of money. You might want to choose your own niche. So you need to be able to decide where to play, but also how to play. And are there any capabilities that you need to acquire in order to be able to play there? And are there any systems that are required? Because if you don't have the capabilities or the systems, you will not succeed in implementing your strategy. So I think this is, I know I picked up 4 or 5 different things from different areas. It may be difficult in the first instance for businesses to be able to grapple with all of these, but you need to remember these and gradually increase your expertise in terms of applying some of these principles while developing your strategy. Yep, you were asking something?
Oh no, I think it's fantastic. It gives areas to work on to build your strategy. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Now, articulating the strategy. Now, this is something else that I believe we often tend to ignore. If your strategy cannot be encapsulated in a one-page document, I don't think it's worth the paper on which it is written or the screen on which it is keyboarded. You've got to be able to communicate your strategy in a clear, concise, and it has to be a statement of intent, what you want to do. And you have to share it with your teams. And sometimes I've seen business owners hold their strategy to their chest. Oh, I don't want to reveal my strategy to my teams, because what if tomorrow they leave and they go to competition and they'll have my strategy? If your strategy is so easy to be replicated by someone else, then I don't think it's a differentiating strategy, number one. Number two, the strategy is not by itself powerful. It's the tactics, the coordinated actions that go along with the strategy that make the strategy work. So you should never be afraid of sharing. If your team does not share or does not know what the strategy is, how do you expect them to work in a way that is in alignment with your strategy? So share your strategy, make it as simple as possible so that everyone can understand, and get the team involved in it, both not only at the time you develop your strategy, but also in terms of sharing it and saying that this is how we want to be able to implement our strategy, and come up with creative suggestions as to how we can do it better. The teams will always respond if you put it that way. And lastly, before I go into the future, why does, earlier I talked about good strategy that's poorly implemented or bad strategy that's well implemented. Oftentimes the tragedy occurs because strategy and tactics are not aligned with each other. And again, I want to give a few tips as to how we can minimize that from happening. Firstly, recognize that both are about making choices. Strategy is about making choices. Tactics are also about making choices. If you realize that, then it makes it clearer, easier for you to align both of them, because they're both about making choices. That's it. Strategy and tactics must evolve in tandem, not sequentially. Now, I know this is a little counterintuitive for more people. Most of the time, we believe strategy is developed in these ivory towers by the executive management in the company, and tactics is something that the soldiers do. But your pawn on a chessboard moves according to what your strategy is, does not move independently. So make sure that whenever you're developing a strategy, think of how are we actually going to implement this? How is it going to play out on the turf, the real turf? If you think that it will not work in the field, rethink your strategy. Similarly, every time you think of a tactic, ask yourself this question: is this tactic on strategy or not? If it is not on strategy, why are we even thinking about it or talking about it? And if it is not, and you still want to implement it, have a good enough reason why you're implementing it. Oftentimes in businesses, there is this temptation to do something because your competitor is doing it. Oh, let's do that. If we don't do that, we're going to lose market share. I think that the moment you start doing that, slowly your strategy is getting eroded by bits and pieces. You're sacrificing something you were wanting to do and doing something that you are forced to do. And that, I think, is not good for any business. So make sure that the strategy and tactics both go together, hand in hand. Importantly, strategy and tactics must reinforce each other. Whatever you do in tactics must support your strategy. And whatever you do in strategy, as I mentioned before, must reinforce the tactics. And even more important is that the tactics must also support each other, not just the strategy alone, but also each other. If one tactic is working against another tactic or the strategy, then it's reducing the effect of whatever investment you have made.
Yes.
So make sure that every tactic is supporting every other tactic. If not, reconsider. And strategy must evolve, adapt in response to emerging opportunities and challenges. As I said before, it's not cast in stone. It's not something that is forever. You've got to think in terms of, and one way of doing that is think of, look at your business every 6 months instead of 1 year. If supposing you're developing you probably develop a 3-year strategy or a 5-year strategy to begin with, but then you review it every year. But do it once every 6 months to see if there have been any changes that have happened in the marketplace, in the broader environment, and see what is it that you need to do in order to be able to adapt to those changes. Again, I know it's easily said than done, but all this requires time, which is why I think you need to delegate things to your team so that you have, as a business owner or a chief executive, you have the time to be able to focus on these more important things. This is a tricky question because it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen, but I just thought I'd pick a few core points, which, in my opinion, could potentially impact on strategy development. I think products and services are getting increasingly similar. If you look at, for instance, an iPhone and a Samsung, whatever, S23, or even your flip phone or whatever, the similarity between products is services is so much that we will need more creativity in strategy development. And I think also products and services are also merging together in some way. Products are becoming are having a greater service component, and services are getting more and more productized in a way. So the earlier we used to have differentiation between product marketing and services marketing. That's probably narrowing down the difference. So again, creativity is how do we embrace techniques from product marketing into services marketing? How do we embrace techniques from services marketing into product marketing? These might become more and more important in future.
Well, products used to be an item, but they're not an item anymore. They're apps and all sorts of things that are not necessarily tangible or a product.
That's right. It's right. And everything has got an app component to it these days. The components of like any product you buy, you either buy it online or you check it online and then go buy in a shop, or go check in a shop and come back and buy it online. Well, whatever happens, I think we tend to do that.
Yes.
Increased adoption of technology will accelerate this trend. I think, as you rightly pointed out, everything is now app-centric in a way. So increased adoption of technology will also accelerate this similarity between products and between products. Now, as AI permeates more businesses, data and insights will be more easily accessible to all. I know AI is not going to be cheap to begin with, but like batteries in electric cars, I think over a period of time, I think it'll become cheaper for businesses to be able to use AI more and more. And when more and more data and more insights are available, it's important that we make our decisions using our human intelligence. So creativity is actually going to drive differentiation because data is going to be more easily accessible. Now, and this is the other thing which I've noticed in a lot of businesses, we are so fixated, obsessed with differentiation. Sometimes we don't think enough about relevance. Is the product relevant? We keep on adding new features and bells and whistles to differentiate our product or service. But are these relevant to the customer or not? And as a good strategist, you need to be able to ask that question. Don't think only of differentiation, think also about relevance. Sometimes successful tactics that address an overarching challenge can lead to an emergent strategy. If you find certain strategies are working really well, pause for a moment and think about, are these tactics actually suggesting to us an emergent strategy, a new strategy for the business? So don't think only strategy to tactics, also think tactics to strategy. A good strategist will always do that. So that, I think, in essence, was what I wanted to share about. I don't know how long it's been. Adrienne, I think we were more or less within our timeline.
Well, thank you so much, Mahesh.
No
Would
worries.
you like to introduce Auracle World?
Oh, okay. I call this Auracle World. I mean, it's a play on the word Oracle. My promise is sounding board for sound strategy. I've done strategy work for a number of years. I've been involved in strategy from day one. I've been working for close to 50 years now. And while doing strategy projects, big strategy projects, it involved a lot of research, a lot of analysis, a lot of thinking time, a lot of creativity to come up with strategies. And now I'm at a stage in my career where I said, okay, is there some way I can pivot the business to be able to become more of a sounding board, where I actually talk to businesses and suggest to them how they could refine their strategy. So basically, by having conversations with them, asking the right kind of questions, I'm able to help them gain more confidence and in their strategies, and give them greater clarity in terms of which direction they should. These are projects which are probably not as time and labor intensive as the full scale strategy projects, so more affordable for businesses. At the same time, it's greater value for them. And it also sort of gives me more time to do other things that I would want to do. So that's Auracle World, your sounding board for sound strategy. As you can see, the letters A and W, they're actually like a sound wave.
Oh, yes.
Which represent the sounding board.
That's
so amazing. My own design, actually, which I got a designer to do it for me, but it was my concept.
Oh, fantastic.
So
I can imagine that would really save businesses a lot of time if they get their strategy much clearer.
Yeah. It's basically trying to validate their strategy. Are they doing the right thing? I mean, sometimes they may have to go back to the drawing board. Sometimes they might say, oh, it only requires a little bit of tweaking. Yeah. But hopefully it'll be helpful for all. So I've got my LinkedIn address there. You can go and see my profile, and that's my email ID, mahesh@oracleworld.com.
That was fantastic, Mahesh. And you have your article or blog on LinkedIn. That's always very interesting.
Yeah, sometimes a little tongue-in-cheek, but yes, it can be a little contrarian at times, but I try to, my intent is basically to encourage people to think a little differently, you know. So I think the biggest challenge for us is going to be, how do we cope in this constantly changing world, where things are uncertain, complex, ambiguous. I think it's ultimately our ability to think differently that can actually overcome these challenges. So, but thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate that. And hopefully, when you post this on LinkedIn or wherever else you're going to be sharing it, people will find it useful. Okay.
Oh, I'm sure they will. It was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Mahesh.